Zoë Kravitz caught in a whirlwind with Harry Styles. It's the romance no one expected, but everyone is talking about. Two icons from different worlds suddenly thrown together in a storm of passion, paparazzi, and speculation. But this shocking headline is only the latest twist in a love life that has been anything but ordinary. From young Hollywood flings to scandalous affairs to a Paris wedding that ended in divorce, Zoe's story is packed with drama, heartbreak, and revelations the public has only begun to uncover. And now, as she steps into the spotlight hand in hand with one of the most famous men alive, her journey has become the ultimate Hollywood saga. This isn't just a story of celebrity gossip, it's the story of how a woman grew up under the spotlight, constantly reinventing herself, and how each relationship marked a turning point in her life. From her earliest romances in the late 2000s, through a marriage in Paris, to her high-profile split from Channing Tatum, and now to rumors of a whirlwind fling with one of the world's biggest pop stars, Zoë Kravitz has seen it all. Tonight, we're peeling back the curtain. What were the breakups that defined her? Which moments shocked fans the most? And what's the real truth behind the sudden spark with Harry Styles? Stay with us for the next 30 minutes because we're about to reveal the untold story, the shocking truth behind Zoë Kravitz's breakups. But first, let's rewind back to where it all began. Her very first romance that put her love life in the public eye. Every great story has a beginning. For Zoë Kravitz, her first brush with the public eye when it came to love began in 2007 when she was just 19 years old. At that time, Zoë was not yet the Hollywood powerhouse we know today. She was a rising star, taking her first steps into the world of acting, slowly stepping out of the shadows of her famous parents, and finding her voice in an industry ready to label her before she could define herself. And then came Ben Foster. At the time, Ben was already making waves in Hollywood, an established actor with credits in films like Hostage and Alpha Dog. When Zoë and Ben met, sparks flew, and soon the two were romantically linked. The world may not have been paying as much attention to Zoë back then, but this relationship marked a turning point. For the very first time, her personal life was beginning to spill into the headlines. Their connection began while working on the indie film Birds of America. On screen, it was just a project, but off screen, their chemistry was undeniable. For Zoë, barely out of her teenage years, this was her introduction to love under the spotlight, and with someone far more seasoned in the industry. And yet, while the romance seemed sweet on the outside, there was already a storm brewing beneath the surface. Ben Foster was 27 at the time, almost a decade older than Zoë. The age gap fueled whispers. Was she too young? Was she moving too fast? Hollywood, of course, loves to speculate. And suddenly, the young daughter of a rock legend and an actress was being judged not for her acting skills, but for who she was holding hands with. Their relationship lasted for about a year, from 2007 into 2008. They were photographed together, often at events, and fans started to pay attention. But as quickly as it began, the romance fizzled out. By the time Zoë's career started gaining traction, the two had quietly gone their separate ways. No messy tabloid scandal, no dramatic breakup statement, just two actors moving on with their lives. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a fling. This was the chapter that introduced Zoë Kravitz to the harsh reality of public love. A first love is always emotional, but for Zoë, it came with an added weight, the realization that every kiss, every date, and every breakup would eventually be consumed by the public. This was her first lesson, that in Hollywood, love never stays private for long. And little did she know, this was only the beginning. Because after Ben Foster, Zoë's name would soon be linked to some of the most fascinating and sometimes controversial figures in Hollywood. And with each new romance, the spotlight would only get brighter. Up next, the whirlwind of short but unforgettable flings. Ezra Miller, Michael Fassbender, and the love she would later call earth-shattering, Penn Badgley. This was Zoë stepping into the Hollywood big leagues, and every relationship came with its own shocking truth. After her first romance with Ben Foster ended, Zoë Kravitz was ready for something new. She was older, more confident, and slowly carving out her own identity outside of her famous parents' shadows. But in Hollywood, every move becomes a headline, and her next relationships would make people see her in a very different light. In 2010, while filming the indie project Beware the Gonzo, Zoë crossed paths with Ezra Miller. The connection between them was undeniable, wild, rebellious, and electric. They were both young, both unpredictable, and it showed. They laughed together, whispered at events, and were spotted disappearing into the night. It wasn't the kind of love that would last, but it wasn't meant to be. Their time together was brief, almost fleeting, but it revealed something important. Zoë wasn't afraid to step into messy, complicated relationships. She wasn't interested in playing it safe. She wanted to feel, to experience, even if it ended as quickly as it began. That same year, another name would shake up her story, Michael Fassbender. Already a respected Hollywood actor, Fassbender was older, more established, and far more experienced in navigating fame. When he and Zoë were linked, the tabloids erupted. She was just in her early 20s. He was in his 30s, already climbing to the top of the industry. For some, it was romantic. For others, it was scandalous. People questioned the age gap, the power imbalance, the speed at which Zoe's name was becoming tied to some of Hollywood's most famous men. Whatever the truth was between them, it didn't last long. But once again, Zoë had stepped further into the spotlight. She was no longer just the daughter of rock and film icons. She was becoming a figure of fascination on her own. And then, in 2011, came a love that felt different, Penn Badgley. The Gossip Girl star was one of television's most recognizable faces, but what he shared with Zoë wasn't about glitz or red carpets. Their romance unfolded quietly in New York City, away from the Hollywood spotlight. They were seen walking hand in hand through the streets, grabbing coffee in Brooklyn, sitting side by side on the subway. It was ordinary, almost private, and for a while, it seemed like Zoë had found something real. This relationship lasted for 2 years, longer than the flings that came before it. And years later, Penn would still describe it as real, true, earth-shattering love. For Zoë, it was a chance to feel grounded, to be loved outside of the chaos of Hollywood. But love doesn't always survive fame. Penn's career was taking him to new heights, while Zoë was balancing her acting with her music, traveling, filming. Distance and time pulled them apart, and by 2013, the relationship had ended. But unlike the others, this one left a lasting mark. Even after the breakup, Penn spoke with nothing but admiration for Zoë. That kind of love doesn't disappear completely. It lingers, leaving both people changed. These years, Ezra, Fassbender, Penn showed Zoe's evolution. They revealed her willingness to take risks, to explore passion, to open herself up fully to love, even when it hurt. Each romance had its own story, its own lesson. Chaos, scandal, deep affection. Together, they shaped her journey, preparing her for what would come next. And what came next was something no one expected, a love story that promised forever, a wedding in Paris, and a heartbreak that would show the world a very different side of Zoë Kravitz. Zoë Kravitz had already lived through the flings, the scandals, and the so-called earth-shattering love. But in 2016, she stepped into something that felt completely different, something serious, something lasting. It was the kind of love that looked like it could rewrite her entire story. That love came in the form of actor Karl Glusman. Their connection began quietly, without the loud tabloid frenzy that had followed some of her earlier romances. It wasn't an instant Hollywood spectacle. It was more private, more subtle, and maybe that was why it grew so strong. By 2016, Zoë and Karl were inseparable. He wasn't a superstar, not a chart-topping musician or a blockbuster lead. He was someone who seemed to give her stability, someone who understood the pressures of acting without drowning her in the chaos of celebrity. By 2018, Karl proposed, and Zoë said yes. Their engagement felt like a turning point. Fans who had followed her journey through the whirlwind of Hollywood relationships suddenly saw her heading towards something permanent, something official, something real. And in June of 2019, the two tied the knot in one of the most breathtaking weddings of the decade at her father Lenny Kravitz's stunning Paris townhouse. The guest list was dazzling. Hollywood stars, musicians, family, and friends gathered under one roof. For Zoë, it must have felt like the dream moment, a union blessed by her family, celebrated by her peers, and documented by magazines all over the world. But as picture-perfect as it seemed, marriage is never as simple as a single beautiful night. Behind the glamour, reality was setting in. Being newlyweds while balancing demanding careers is never easy, especially when both people are trying to establish themselves in Hollywood. By late 2020, whispers began to circulate that things weren't as perfect as they had looked. And then came the confirmation. Zoë Kravitz had filed for divorce. The news broke like a shockwave. Just 1 year after her Paris wedding, the fairy tale was already over. Fans couldn't believe it. Hadn't this been the relationship that was supposed to last? The quiet, steady love after all the chaos? But love, even the kind that feels safe, doesn't always survive the weight of expectation. By August 2021, the divorce was finalized, the marriage was over, and Zoë found herself single once again. Yet, unlike some of her previous relationships, there wasn't much scandal, no explosive headlines, no public fighting. The story of Zoë and Karl ended the way it had begun, quietly. Two people who had loved, who had promised forever, and who ultimately realized that forever wasn't in the cards. For Zoë, this wasn't just another breakup. It was the closing of an important chapter. It was the moment she walked away from the idea of stability that had once looked like salvation. And though it ended in heartbreak, it also gave her something invaluable: freedom. Freedom to redefine herself, freedom to start over, freedom to chase the next chapter without being tied down. But the story doesn't stop there, because just months after the divorce, Zoë would find herself stepping into a romance that set Hollywood buzzing like never before. A relationship with one of the biggest names in the entertainment industry, a man who brought charisma, star power, and headlines with him everywhere he went. This was the era of Zoë Kravitz and Channing Tatum. After the quiet heartbreak of her divorce from Karl Glusman, Zoë Kravitz didn't disappear from the spotlight. In fact, she stepped straight into a new role, not just as an actress, but as a director. She was working on her first feature film, Blink Twice, and in the process, she found herself drawn to a man who was already one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, Channing Tatum. At first, it was purely professional. Zoë had cast him in her film, and people were curious about the pairing. He was the star of Magic Mike, the blockbuster action hero with undeniable charisma. She was the cool, edgy it girl of Hollywood, known for her indie style and quiet confidence. On paper, they seemed like total opposites, but sometimes opposites don't just attract, they collide. By 2021, whispers started. They were spotted biking together in New York, laughing, looking comfortable in each other's presence. Then came the red carpet appearances, the public outings, the glances that said more than words ever could. The world quickly realized that this wasn't just a work collaboration, this was romance. And not just any romance. This was Zoë Kravitz and Channing Tatum, a pairing no one had seen coming, but that suddenly made perfect sense. Fans were obsessed. The media followed every move. Together, they seemed playful, affectionate, and deeply supportive of one another. Channing spoke openly about how much he admired Zoe's talent, how impressed he was by her vision as a director. Zoë, in turn, praised Channing's energy, his humor, and the way he brought light into her life after a difficult few years. It felt like a rebirth, a second chance at love after heartbreak. By 2023, the relationship had reached a new milestone. Engagement rumors began swirling, and in October of that year, it was confirmed they were officially engaged. It felt like a modern fairy tale. Zoë, who had once walked away from a Paris wedding that ended in divorce, was daring to love again. And this time, it was with someone the public adored just as much as she did. But as always, real life isn't as simple as the headlines. Behind the scenes, there were differences. Channing was a devoted father, balancing his career with raising his daughter. Zoë was pouring herself into her work, her projects, her music, her art. They were both deeply ambitious, both constantly in motion, and sometimes their worlds didn't align the way they needed to. By late 2024, the news broke that the engagement was over. After 3 years together, Zoë and Channing had quietly gone their separate ways. At first, it shocked fans. How could a couple that looked so perfect from the outside, a couple that seemed to glow with happiness, call it quits? But the truth was more complicated. Sources close to them described it as amicable, rooted not in betrayal or scandal, but in the simple reality of being at different stages in life. And when Zoë finally spoke about it, her words were revealing. She didn't lash out. She didn't hide behind silence. Instead, she said she was grateful. Grateful for Channing's presence in her life. Grateful for the joy they had shared. Grateful even for the heartbreak that taught her what she truly needed. It was maturity. It was grace. It was a reminder that sometimes love stories don't end in disaster. They just end. But even as that chapter closed, Zoë was stepping into another. Because love doesn't wait, not in Hollywood. And in early 2025, her name would start being linked to a new set of faces. Rumors of casual dates, fleeting connections, names whispered in the tabloids. Nothing too serious, nothing too official. But one thing was clear: Zoë Kravitz was still very much at the center of the story. And those whispers, those early 2025 rumors, were only setting the stage. Because soon, her love life would take a turn that no one saw coming. A connection so surprising, it made headlines around the world. Zoë Kravitz and Harry Styles. After the end of her engagement to Channing Tatum, Zoë didn't waste her time hiding away. She was moving forward, reinventing herself once again. But Hollywood never sleeps, and neither do the tabloids. By early 2025, her name was back in the headlines, this time linked to a new wave of rumored romances. One of the first was Noah Centineo, the Netflix heartthrob who had captured an entire generation with his boyish charm. The two were spotted together in Los Angeles in February, laughing over coffee, sharing quiet dinners, slipping into cars while paparazzi cameras clicked in the distance. For months, rumors swirled that something was happening between them. Friends insisted it was casual, nothing serious, just two people enjoying each other's company. But the whispers wouldn't stop. Was Noah just a rebound? Or was Zoë giving herself space to explore something lighter, something without the weight of forever attached to it? Then came Austin Butler. By the summer, speculation shifted toward him. They had been seen together while promoting her film Caught Stealing in Paris, appearing side by side at events, exchanging looks that set the rumor mill on fire. Some swore they were more than friends. Others said it was nothing but good press. But either way, their connection fed the media for weeks. Was this Zoe's type now? The rising leading man, mysterious and brooding, standing next to her in photos that looked too perfect to be coincidence? Still, nothing seemed concrete. These weren't official relationships. They were whispers, sightings, guesses. In a way, it felt like Zoë was drifting between chapters, letting the world speculate while she quietly lived her life. And maybe that was the plan. Maybe she wanted to keep everyone guessing. But then something shifted, because in August of 2025, Zoë Kravitz was no longer being linked to whispers, flings, or casual nights out. She was suddenly tied to a man who doesn't just make headlines, he defines them. A man whose every move is dissected by fans, followed by paparazzi, and splashed across magazines worldwide. A man who had already lived through his own whirlwind of fame and heartbreak. Harry Styles. The rumors started softly, almost unbelievably. First, a sighting in London, then photographs from Rome, and then New York. Zoë and Harry together, walking hand in hand, sparking the kind of frenzy only two global icons can ignite. What began as whispers was about to explode into one of the most talked about romances of the year. And just like that, the world's attention turned to them. Zoë Kravitz and Harry Styles, the pairing no one predicted, but suddenly everyone was watching. It began quietly, almost like a rumor too wild to be true. After all, Zoë Kravitz and Harry Styles belonged to different worlds. She was the cool, artistic actress, someone who moved between Hollywood and indie circles with effortless style. He was one of the biggest pop stars on the planet, a man who couldn't step outside without being chased by cameras and screaming fans. Their names didn't seem destined to collide, and yet, in late summer of 2025, they did. The first sighting came in London, August nights, a small, tucked-away restaurant, the kind of place celebrities escape to when they want privacy. But privacy is hard to find when the couple at the center of the story can't stop looking at each other. Witnesses claimed they were kissing, holding hands, acting like teenagers who didn't care who saw. It wasn't staged, it wasn't cold or rehearsed, it was passion, and the world was about to notice. Days later, the story jumped across borders. Rome, the eternal city. Zoë and Harry were seen strolling the cobblestone streets, walking arm in arm, laughing as though they'd known each other for years. Photographs of them together went viral, breaking through the noise of celebrity gossip and flooding timelines worldwide. The pairing felt too surreal, too unexpected, and yet there they were, undeniable proof that something was happening. Then came New York. This time, the sightings weren't fleeting. They were everywhere. Holding hands in Brooklyn, sitting in cafes with matching outfits, sipping coffee like any ordinary couple. Only they weren't ordinary. Every move was tracked, every smile magnified, every gesture dissected. Paparazzi captured them walking together, comfortable, unafraid, even as flashbulbs lit the streets around them. The moment Harry met Lenny Kravitz was the final spark. Zoe's father, her rock, her role model, shaking hands with Harry Styles. That image alone was enough to turn rumors into something far more real. The reactions were immediate. Fans were divided. Some celebrated the new couple, calling them the most stylish, unexpected pairing of the year. Others doubted it, insisting it was a fling, nothing more than a Hollywood distraction. Headlines screamed, "Zoe and Harry, friends with benefits?" While others declared, "This is not just casual, this is serious." Sources close to the two offered conflicting stories. One insider claimed they had gone from 0 to 60, that their connection was deeper than anyone realized. Another suggested they were just enjoying each other, keeping it light, refusing to put a label on it. But the truth was plain for anyone who saw them together. The chemistry wasn't fake. The way they leaned into each other, the way they laughed like they were in their own world, the way Harry looked at her like she was the only person in the room, it was all too real. For Zoë, this was another chapter in a long, complicated story of love under the spotlight. But this time felt different. This wasn't a quiet indie actor or a co-star or a boyfriend hiding from cameras. This was Harry Styles, one of the most famous men alive, a global phenomenon, someone whose personal life had been picked apart for more than a decade. Together, they weren't just a couple, they were a cultural moment.
The images of them spread faster than any press release could control. Fans on TikTok made edits of Zoë and Harry walking the streets of Rome. Twitter buzzed with theories, from wedding predictions to wild conspiracy takes. Magazines ran cover stories within days, declaring them Hollywood's hottest new pair. And yet, neither of them said a word. No confirmations, no denials, just public appearances that spoke louder than any official statement. In many ways, that silence only made it bigger. The mystery of it all, were they serious? Was it just a fling? Was this destined to end as quickly as it started? Or was the world watching the beginning of something historic? The story kept the story alive. By September, there was no avoiding it. Zoë Kravitz and Harry Styles were officially the couple everyone was talking about. And whether it was a love story for the ages or just a moment that would fade into gossip history, it didn't matter. For now, they had the world's attention. And for Zoë, after nearly 2 decades of public romances, breakups, heartbreaks, and reinventions, this felt like the ultimate twist. From the young girl dating Ben Foster to the woman walking hand in hand with Harry Styles in New York, her journey had come full circle. Always surprising, always unpredictable, and always captivating. But the story doesn't end here, because every chapter in Zoë's love life has taught her something new. And as the world speculates on where this one will go, one truth remains. Zoë Kravitz has mastered the art of turning heartbreak into transformation. Looking back, it's almost hard to believe how far Zoë Kravitz's journey has come. From her first young romance with Ben Foster, the relationship that quietly introduced her to the world of public love, to the whirlwind flings that followed with Ezra Miller and Michael Fassbender. Each connection added another layer to her story: chaos, scandal, passion. Then came Penn Badgley, the man she would later describe as her earth-shattering love. For 2 years, they tried to hold on to something private and real, even as fame pulled them in different directions. When it ended, it was bittersweet, leaving behind memories and respect that lasted long after the romance was gone. Her marriage to Karl Glusman seemed to change everything. For a brief moment, it looked like the fairy tale had finally arrived, a wedding in Paris, surrounded by family, friends, and the glitter of Hollywood. But even fairy tales can break. Within a year, that chapter closed, teaching Zoë one of her hardest lessons, that forever doesn't always mean forever. Then came Channing Tatum, one of her most high-profile loves. What started as a work collaboration blossomed into something the world couldn't stop talking about. They laughed together, they supported each other, they got engaged, and for a while, it looked like the second chance at happily ever after. But again, reality stepped in, and by 2024, that story too had ended. Not with bitterness, but with gratitude, proving that not all breakups have to leave scars. The beginning of 2025 brought whispers and rumors. Noah Centineo, Austin Butler, names tossed into the air by paparazzi and gossip magazines. They were fleeting, uncertain, maybe even distractions, but they set the stage for the story no one expected. Because in the end, all roads led here, to August of 2025, to London, to Rome, to New York, to Harry Styles. And suddenly, Zoë Kravitz wasn't just another actress navigating Hollywood love. She was part of one of the most surprising, talked-about romances of the decade. The images of them together, the silence they've chosen instead of statements, the way they seem to float through crowds as if the rest of the world doesn't exist, it all feels like a culmination of everything that came before. What does it mean? Is this the real thing? Is it just another chapter? Or is it the chapter? No one knows yet, maybe not even Zoë herself. But what we do know is this: every relationship, every heartbreak, every headline has shaped her. They've turned her from a teenager stumbling into the spotlight into a woman who owns it, a woman who embraces reinvention and who refuses to let love or loss define her.
And now, as she walks hand in hand with Harry Styles, the world is holding its breath, waiting, watching, wondering. Because when it comes to Zoë Kravitz, the only certainty is that her story is far from over. And that's the story so far. From teenage love to whirlwind flings, from marriage and divorce to high-profile breakups, Zoë Kravitz has lived it all in the spotlight. And now, with Harry Styles at her side, the world is asking the question, is this just another chapter or the beginning of something bigger? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell because this story isn't finished yet, and the next twist could come at any moment.